Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Point Reyes podcast, the Watching Humans podcast, the Skyjack podcast. We have special guest Laura Cunningham, and I'm showing a few of her paintings, and that's she and I in Point Reyes. We actually have a full series on my YouTube channel that you might be interested in. Look at that, bears. Imagine having bears in California. Wouldn't that be something? Now, this last image is going to be an important one. We're going to talk about that a lot on the show today. So I just wanted to give people a quick taste of what we'll be talking about in the images that Laura Cunningham provides. And, you know, Laura, I usually introduce you as biologist, ecologist, author, but you're also an artist. I often leave that part out.
Hey, Skylar, by the way, hi. Why don't you get Laura front and center? Although I appreciate the camera on me. The way you've broken it up is, yeah, there you go. Thank you.
That's much better.
Yeah, thanks, Skylar. Yeah, art's kind of I was trying to make a living at, doing scientific illustration and wildlife painting at one point, but I don't know. It's hit or miss. So I'm now going to be a biologist, and art is a hobby.
We are going to be talking about this a little bit today. This is look at this. Look at the size of this. Jam-packed with important information about the changes that have taken place in California. In fact, it's called "A State of Change: Forgotten Landscapes of California." Text and art by Laura Cunningham. Thrilled to have you here, Laura. I feel like you've been on a gag order for a long time.
And that's because just to set this up, Laura Cunningham, who is the California director of the Western Watersheds Project, is one of three plaintiffs, along with Resource Renewal Institute and the Center for Biological Diversity, is involved in a lawsuit against the Park Service for its management, or I would say mismanagement, of the seashore since 2019. And that lawsuit has finally been resolved in a settlement deal involving money from the Nature Conservancy to pay a lot of ranchers who have accepted a voluntary deal to leave the park. And now Laura can speak more freely about all this stuff, or at least freely enough that she can share her wisdom and insight with us on a lot of topics. We're grateful for it.
In fact, let's set some ground rules, because I'm still not sure what you guys are allowed to talk about. You're not allowed to talk about some of it, even though the ranchers have been blabbing everything. I mean, they seem like they're in full violation of that. And again, I don't know what consequences they'll face. Probably none, as usual. But Laura, are you allowed to say how you feel about this settlement and why you feel the way you do?
Yeah, no, thanks, Skylar. Yeah, I'm sort of like, I was involved really heavily with you guys before the settlement. We wrote comments, and we were out there in the field and making your great videos. And Jack, you were like all over the place with events. So I did not participate in the settlement and mediation at all. So I fortunately can't even talk about it, because I just don't even know. But I know some of the ground rules that, we're supposed to sort of move forward now. I personally, I'm just going to say it's not perfect. I think there could have been a lot better outcomes of this. Personally, I really wish we had just removed all of the cattle from the seashore and Golden Gate National Recreation Area. But here we are. And I think it's definitely a step forward and a step up and a step into the future. So I'm definitely ready to talk about, the future, where we used to be and where we're going.
It's going to be a little bit redundant, but it's such an important point. We're going to come back to it because Eric Molbar talked about it. Rick, biologist, and Julie Phillips have all been on here talking about the difference between restoring with native animals or just, the restoration that can take place with humans removing themselves from the situation. And I was extremely disturbed to find out that cattle will still be in there. To me, that means that you're actually going to prevent recovery and restoration. And if any tries to take place, you're going to destroy it. And I'm very disturbed by the reports that we're already receiving about cattle moving into the elk reserve, which means like overnight, if you've observed what cattle do, overnight, the cattle will undo decades of healing that have taken place in that part of the park.
Where are you getting that from? The cattle are in the reserve, or going to be in the reserve? I'm not sure what you're saying.
I don't want to say the name because they haven't given permission, but it was reported and confirmed by some of our allies that go out there.
That it will happen, or it has happened?
Has happened. And guess what? It happened before the elk fence started coming down and the deal went through. The cattle have violated where they're allowed to graze repeatedly over the decades and caused serious damage and have never faced any consequences. Whereas if the elk go on ranch land, they call for execution. Right, exactly. I have a video I want to show, but Laura, go ahead and tell us what you're feeling before I show that, because I've been blabbering the whole time.
No, that's a really good point. And welcome to my world of really messy conservation. I mean, I call myself a conservation biologist, but it seeps into politics so much, and the messy politics. And, as we've seen, there's a lot of the other side accuses us of this, and conservation groups, we're the devil, or maybe we're trying our hardest, but it's a messy thing. And I would like just to be, this is a national park unit, let's have it for wildlife and a little bit of recreation. We can have some trails, but as we've seen in the last 5-6 years, it's like the messiest deal ever to get this way, and nobody's happy, right? Nobody's happy with this deal. My goal is that we have tule elk, right, and some native bunch grasses here and there, but it is disturbing hearing that cattle are now kind of invading the Tomales elk reserve that is, supposed to be not a reserve anymore. And I think the politics crept into that, where, everyone was trying to get this deal done before the Trump administration came in. And, we succeeded, but the Park Service rushed, and they didn't apparently finish putting up a wildlife-friendly fence along that area. And as far as I know, there's gaps. So, yeah, it's messy, and hopefully we can correct that.
So I would like to wade into thank you for that, Laura, the two things, politics and positioning, which are everything. Positioning being kind of a marketing / advertising term, which is an area I focus a lot of my attention on. So there's been concern talk about this deal that if the environmentalists like us three don't want any cows there, we're not happy with the deal, which is one truth, but not the entire truth. And then, of course, the ranchers, while they're taking the money, a second payment of millions, and complaining about the deal as well, we were forced into it, like Kevin Lunny was saying, oh, poor us, that the deal could be tanked. So I want to say that although we can gripe about its shortcomings, which is there will still be cattle in the park, we can also say, I will speak for myself now, I'm really glad about this deal, which is to say thousands fewer cows will be in the park, and the 3 elk herds will be reunited. The Tule elk herd in the reserve will be freed for the first time ever since they were reintroduced in 1978. And I take this as great. Let's get this done, which is going to, occur over the next 14 months. And then let's move forward and not silence ourselves to get all cattle out of the park, because cattle are never a good thing in a national park. They will always be a destructive force. There's no such thing as conservation grazing, no such thing as targeted grazing, no such thing as regenerative ranching. It's all cattle industry, which is to say beef and dairy cow BS. Marketing, advertising.
Of course, the problem, Jack, is that most people don't even agree with what you just said, even though it's the truth, because our own Park Service are promoting regenerative grazing and conservation grazing. I mean, our own Park Service. So, of course, the public is led astray.
So what we do, I agree with you, Skylar, absolutely. So what we do is what we three can do, which is you keep repeating the truth. And that's the only hope we have. And I know it's really easy and appropriate to be cynical and say, well, they repeat the lies. Well, they do. That's how we got in the first place, where it's the hardworking steward of the land, which I won't say that sentence without saying they're also sewers on the land. You don't just repeat the lie unless it's in context of saying it's a lie. Here's their lie. So we repeat the truth, repeat the truth, repeat the truth, including, I do want to make the announcement on March 1st, Saturday, 1 to 4 p.m. in Mill Valley. We're gathering, all of us elk folk and park restoration folk and conservation biologists like the amazing Laura Cunningham here, to celebrate this historic improvement in things. We are allowed to celebrate getting thousands of cows out, even though I hope people like you, Skylar, come and let loose with your criticisms if you feel inclined to do so. I'm defending what will be a messy, democratic gathering of activists who are free to say what they feel is true, even if it's not the party line of, as I'm playing a little bit of politics, which is, well, it's a good deal, but we want more, rather than really, going at it for being for a lot of crap. Because I think it's overall a win, again, to repeat, but I want everyone's voice at that Saturday, March 1st party in Mill Valley. We'll be sending out an invitation within the next week.
I want to speak to our viewers really quick. Today is going to be a great day for you to pose questions to Laura Cunningham. And after I show this video, I'm going to try and shut my mouth as much as I can. And I will also take some callers. When you do call, just please present your question. We won't have time for a full monologue from people, but please have your questions ready. You can start typing them in the chat if you'd like, and we will get to them. I'm going to show a video because it's a segment from a longer piece I've done, and I think it really sets the stage for what we're dealing with in terms of elk versus cattle.
Let's focus on plant ecology for a minute. This is Point Reyes, September 13th, 2020. This is also Point Reyes, the very same day, except this is in the elk reserve, free of ranching activity. And there isn't any incredible geographic change. There isn't a mountain separating the two areas. There's just a fence. And right now I'm panning from the elk reserve to ranch land. And I'm going to point something out here. As drastic as that change is, that's land not actively being ranched. That's land that's recovering from ranching. This is me standing inside the elk reserve looking back out at land that is actively being ranched. Maybe you're thinking, that's not fair. You got to show it during the winter when it's rainy. Okay, well, there you go. This is ranch land, January of 2020. So yeah, there's some green, even where there shouldn't be green. And this is the elk reserve, also January of 2020. Ranch land, later in the spring. And the elk reserve, later in the spring. Point being, that was as good and as green as the ranch land gets. But during September, during the harsher months, even the elk reserve, where native plants are allowed to live, you can still find green. These are plants that are drought resistant because they evolved in the climate of California with animals that evolved with those plants. And while it's true that the hills do turn green in the winter in the ranchland, that is not habitat. That is essentially a golf course void of biodiversity. And it's not just some coincidence that vegetation that provides habitat for animals is missing from ranchland. No, it was removed by and for that industry. And that reduction, unfortunately, is ongoing. Fire control and vegetation management is a topic increasingly on everyone's minds, so I've got to touch on this really quick. A promotional spin on behalf of the ranchers is that they are actually fighting back invasive brush, and in so doing are keeping the seashore recreationally accessible. There I am, struggling through the invasive brush. which, by the way, is actually native brush. Gee, can't wait to get back to that ranch land for my beautiful hike in nature. And no animal agriculture propaganda would be complete without the argument that we need grazing cattle to reduce the threat of fire. Keep that in mind as you learn about the plants in Point Reyes.
So, of course, I cut it there because once you start talking about the plants, we're going to get really complicated. Now, if you are interested in that, Laura and I have gone out there and explored the plants, and I have this in videos online. My summary of what you just saw is that in the elk reserve, even in the harshest of conditions, you have green perennial natives that provide habitat, sequester carbon, and are far more fire resistant than the cheatgrass, all the European invasives that are in the ranch land, which is not habitat, looks like crap, and yet somehow we're supposed to be thanking the ranchers for this. And environmentalists are evil for saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't do that in a national park. And how is it, Laura? Sorry, that was too long of a pause. Laura, how is it that I'm seeing the press Democrat, I'm seeing all of these outlets talking about the secret deal as if there was only one side of that secret deal? You know, the ranchers were participating in the secrecy, and yet somehow it was only the Nature Conservancy that are the bad guys for participating in this secret deal. It's just interesting how they're spinning that.
I thought that was interesting. And I've worked with the Nature Conservancy elsewhere in California and even in Nevada. So they were brought in to try to help fund the ranchers, and I wish the ranchers would keep remembering that these families have been, getting paid a second time millions of dollars to leave, and they could have said no, like two of the beef ranchers did at the seashore. But yeah, your films are so great, Skylar. You have been here since the beginning of all of this, and you too, Jack. I mean, you guys have been, in the trenches with me since 2018, when we were going out there and filming this, and trying to find the little teeny ungrazed native coastal prairies. So yeah, and to address the fire issue, that's come up, of course, in a gigantic way in California. I mean, every other year we have, the worst fire ever now, like the LA fires. But what I'd like to say is there are these ponds in the seashore that go back something like 2,000 years. They're not stock ponds. They're natural habitat for frogs, the native creatures. And some paleontologists have taken cores of the mud. You can, get several feet of mud at the bottom of these ponds and then take them to the laboratory and look at pollen. Pollen is like indestructible stuff. And carbon date back in time 2,000 years ago, and actually sort out what plants were at the seashore before European settlement. And guess what's all over the place in this core back 2,000 years before present? The evil coyote brush. There's coyote brush pollen all through the core, and it's interesting because it fluctuates. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it just takes over. There's grass pollen, oak, pine, our native bishop pine, which will float in from the distance.
That's all in the pollen record?
Water plants.
All of those are in the pollen record?
Yep. And this is published, peer review scientific paper, which I have given to the Park Service over and over again since 2018, when we were commenting on the environmental impact statement. So that shows that what you were hiking in that beautiful film, where beautiful on the natural side of the fence, is a native coastal prairie. And I like to describe the original coastal prairie that was on the seashore before cows was probably a mosaic of bunch grasses with deep roots that went down 6 feet in the ground. That is carbon sequestration. Wildflower fields, little wet meadows, and then a lot of shrubs. That yellow lupin may be native. Coyote brush, definitely native. There's blackberry. I mean, that's habitat for white-crowned sparrows, brush rabbits. So it was a shifting mosaic of really open grassland and the shrublands. And the Tule elk were the grazers that probably kept that partly open. The Coast Miwok tribes for the last 2,000 years probably did spot burning here and there in small areas, and so they helped keep it open. And I've told the Park Service over and over again that we can use prescribed fire, cultural fire, with the help of tribes to keep some of that coyote brush in, a little bit open, shift some areas like 5-acre areas to grass, have other areas remain coyote brush. And the Park Service used to have a prescribed fire program. So if they are crying that, oh, we can't do anything about fuel, we have to have cows, that is simply not true.
It's not true, and it's lazy, and it's conveniently still supporting the people that I believe the Park Service are in fact in bed with. Now, I emphasized the pollen records because I've actually seen as a part of the effort to defend the ranchers saying that, oh, well, these trees aren't even supposed to be here. The Europeans planted that, like the Bishop pines, and like as a justification for getting rid of them, things like that. And, it turns out it's not true. But how quickly do people just rush to embrace something like that as long as it allows them to continue supporting what they already support? It's not true. Look, you have people like Laura who have done the work, who have researched this, who have written books about all over California and what you can actually see what California used to look like before it was more or less converted for commodity. And I really want to point out that the ranchers had the nerve to not only not acknowledge coyote brush as native, but to call it invasive and problematic. And there's a difference between non-native and invasive. Invasive is a behavior, like, is it going to take over an area? But I'm not seeing coyote brush do that anywhere I've gone. Have you seen coyote brush behave in an invasive manner?
No.
Why are they getting away with saying things that are flat out lies?
I'm shocked to learn there's gambling at Rick's. How can they say things that are untrue? I've never heard of such a thing. I mean, the friggin' dairy and beef business, for heaven's sake. It's there's no more destructive industry on the planet, including the oil industry, which is subsumed within the cattle industry. And that's told as a wonderful thing. And that's what the majority believe. So you're complaining about coyote brush. I just kind of, oh, cute. Coyote brush is getting a bad name, which is a beautiful, lovely plant that's been here for thousands of years. Right. And you're worried about coyote brush.
Right.
Wow. And I have to have a sense of humor with this, or I, stick a fork in my head and just despair of how crazy it is. So what we do is what we did for, by the way, to set the record straight, Skylar's been on this for, I think, 2018? 2017. I saw Skylar's film, The Shame of Point Reyes, in 2019 in the summer and said, oh my God, I had no idea. I'm ashamed I didn't know any of this stuff after going to Point Reyes for 20 years. Got involved in 2020. So I've been on it for less than 5 years, but very active. Thank you, Laura. Yes. And we changed federal policy in the last 5 years, and of course on the backs of giants, of the people, from Susan Ives to Marty Griffin to you to Julie Phillips to Jim Cota. So many people have been involved in this for many more years. All that is a groundswell of truth telling, which actually can have effect. That's how these changes came about. So I totally love Skylar's cynical take and bitter take because it's appropriate and justified. And I'm also going to be a voice balancing that necessary voice with the optimism and the fire of, we can do this, folks. That's why I really was pushing on this party on March 1st to say that, the people united can actually occasionally have a win, if not never defeated. So we get the truth out, keep repeating it, and there is something to the truth which can finally stick against all odds. And we're going to lose many of the battles, but you do what you can do. Off soapbox. Thank you.
Jocelyn Knight comments, coyote brush supports something like 180 species of insects, birds, and animals. And Yeah, coyote brush is on my mind all the time because I've been documenting the destructive goat grazing programs that are sweeping California. And the very first thing they do is wipe out two of the brushes that we have left, Pacific poison oak and coyote brush. And they just destroy them immediately before they get to any of the cheatgrass that they're supposed to be engaging in. And the wildlife don't have anything. And the coyote brush is literally turned into firewood. A fire mitigation program is turning living, healthy plants into firewood while not solving the invasive cheatgrass problem and barely even reducing it temporarily. And I just feel terrible because I find burrows under the bases of these things. I find nests in the branches that were broken to the ground from the goats. And those are the smaller grazing animals that are used in California. And they're like a hurricane coming through. You know, you only need 3 cows to destroy Pierce Point Ranch area.
So totally agreed, Skylar. I'm sorry, I'm jumping because I want to ask Laura a question, which I've been itching to ask here.
Please.
And it's so easy to go on a rant about, you know, defending coyote brush as a wonderful plant and that all domesticated animals grazed is destructive. Should be wild animals in the park only. Laura, what would you do if you were God? if you had control? Get the cows out of the park, I assume. Please confirm that allegation I'm making, that you would want no cows in the park. And then tell me what you would do to help heal the land or let the land heal itself. I'm curious of how much, because I don't trust mankind with management. I would trust you. I would trust Laura Sheraton, biologist. I know Julie Phillips, people who actually have an emotional and loving connection to the land, the way Native Americans did, ideally. Not all today, but some did. I think there are people too. What would you do? Go.
Well, thank you, Jack. Yeah, no, I trust you too on this. Yeah, please get rid of all the cows, all the livestock, take down all the 300 plus miles of barbed wire fences. I mean, that would be like a big one. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. You know, I'm studying the revised record of decision of 2025, and they're going to have things like Skylar mentioned, targeted grazing, which means, okay, we're not going to keep a herd of cows there for a season or all year long. We're going to sort of, whenever we get permission, whenever we want, put in a little herd of cattle and sort of, I guess, maybe shift it through different pastures. Targeted grazing is something, you know, that could be a whole other interview we could do with people, because that's being used more and more and more for getting away with a lot of grazing. They're even going to have something called virtual fences, which is in this record of decision, where they're going to put cell towers up and then put shock collars on the cows, literally like dog shock collars. And cows are smart. I actually like cows. I think they're a neat animal. You know, they maybe belong not in a park. But so when the cows hit a grid, a virtual fence set up by electronic, you know, cell tower mapping, they get a little shock and they learn, okay, don't go there. Although I've heard that some stubborn cows will force through, so it's not perfect. So anyway, I would get rid of all that and, you know, maybe take down quite a lot of the buildings and structures. And I am completely for, you know, helping the workers find new jobs and new housing. Although this is not a unique problem. There are dairies shutting down all over California, Nevada. And, you know, these people need to be helped too. So it's not like a special problem of the seashore. It's maybe called capitalism. But, you know, I don't want to just tell people you have to leave. We should definitely, and I think there's like some millions of dollars that is in this deal to help transition folks from the housing on the seashore to private
Didn't Eric
housing.
tell us there was nearly $4 million that was going to?
The number I've heard, Eric may have more accurate numbers, but the number I heard at the town hall with everybody present there, represented anyway, was 2.5 million set aside by the Nature Conservancy. They will additionally try to get more money, but note, anybody listening, The ranchers who cry, well, I would say crocodile tears, but crocodiles have feelings and are beautiful animals, sentient beings. Ranchers, arguably so. It wasn't the ranchers who are complaining about the deal who are helping the ranch workers. It's the, well, Schuyler would say evil environmentalists, to quote the lie from the ranchers. It's the Nature Conservancy that cut this deal that's being demonized that actually is helping raise the money to help the ranch workers. Shows you who the good guys are here, which is the environmentalists. And I really, it's so tricky. The sarcastic part of me wants to keep repeating their lies because it makes me angry, but that actually repeats the lie and it drives it home for people who don't know the context and listen to this. So the environmentalists are the good guys in this case, including the Nature Conservancy, who is, I don't think, a perfect organization, but they're the ones who are going to help the ranch workers, not the ranchers. The ranchers have screwed the workers. That's what they do.
Yeah, look, people lose their jobs everywhere. I've lost jobs, and I've had to move due to losing a job. Hell, I've had a job and still had to move because it didn't pay enough to live in expensive California. It's just amazing to me that if you were exploited by ranchers and you're an undocumented citizen and you had the joy of living in coastal property, you deserve assistance with housing. What about the rest of us? I mean, I think just about everyone could use some assistance with housing, with the exception of the multimillionaire ranchers.
Laura went to a remote location to get a better connection. When she's back, I do want to ask Laura another question, and that she said, I've heard that a lot before, which is there's another 300 miles or so of low barbed wire fences, which the elk can jump over and deer can jump over, presumably. But she said she wanted to get all the fencing out of the ranches, which isn't going to happen in the deal. But I want to ask Laura, assuming she can hear me now, tell me from your more educated biologist perspective, why it's important to get all fencing out of Point Reyes Seashore, the additional hundreds of miles of fencing that Schuyler has documented. So maybe she's working on her connection right now. It looks like she's not here at the moment. You know what I'm saying, Schuyler? Is she in more?
I was just waiting to see if she had audio. I guess she doesn't have audio. Yeah. So Karen Lease mentions that the Nature Conservancy has been caught in some dirty stuff, and I'm seeing this come out also. Obviously, that's disturbing.
Well, they're pro cattle ranching, so I disagree with them on that. But it doesn't mean that. But it still means I support the deal because it's a step in the right direction. I think we hear she's grazing some cattle right now.
I think it's a dog. I think I hear a dog.
Yeah. Funny. Right. It's like a Bugs Bunny cartoon with like, ooh, what sound effects is Mel Blanc making in the background?
Sorry, I'm muting Laura.
Sure, thank you.
Sounds like she might actually be driving to find a new connection.
So someone asked, I don't know who NC is, can citizens responsibly engage in revegetation? I do want to get into this with Laura. She's a precious guest. We only have another 25 minutes, and I want to hear more of what her expertise tells her would be, if she were God, if she were in control, what to do out there.
NC, I had the same question for Laura. In summary, she says, I hope so, but maybe she has more detail.
Here she is.
Okay, let me unmute you.
And Laura, could you hear our conversation just now, or should I repeat my question for you? Oh, she's still getting online. Okay, another. Sledge behave.
Hey, Laura, let us know when you are ready.
Yeah, why don't you mute her sound, and then Laura, just wave to us when you're ready to come back on. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, I was concerned when I asked Laura that question. I was just concerned how much it's going to make the Park Service look bad when they allow outside organizations and citizens to come in and start doing the actual restoration that they should have been engaged in. I mean, you know what happened to Diane
Oppenheim. Diana.
Yeah, she was volunteer of the year, and then she got extradited.
Well, Diana, God bless her activist heart and honest soul, was not willing to lie or muzzle herself about the truth. So she was volunteer of the year with the National Park Service, working in the park for free. And then she wanted to speak up about the atrocities happening to the elk that she saw, which were truthful. And they said, no, you can't do that. And she said, well, just on my own time. And they said, no, you can't do that. you have to leave. And then she said, see ya.
Yeah.
God bless her. By the way, I did communicate with Diane. I'm trying to get her to our party on March 1st in Mill Valley. I think she may not be able to come, but we'll probably have her either record something. Anyway, her presence will be there one way or t'other.
So when we're trying to be positive for a change, I'll try to be positive. All the miles of barbed wire and other fencing that Laura Cunningham just mentioned, that was actually going to be increased in the previous preferred amendment that the Park Service was pushing forward, which was a carbon copy of a wish list that the ranchers sent to the Park Service.
I'm waiting for the positive part.
Well, at least more isn't going up, and I'm saying that with hesitation because I don't know what this targeted cattle crap's gonna do.
So, there will be a net reduction of cows, and I guess what I would say, to be continuing to be hopeful, as Paula noticed I'm trying to be here, to have some balance of voices, because all these voices have truth in them. Our job as citizen activists continues, which is to advocate for what's right, go to the media, explain all these things that, cows are destructive. We don't need cows in the park to keep fire danger down. That's utter nonsense. More tule elk breeding and spreading can maintain the vegetation in a healthier way. And I mean, there's no fire danger in a friggin' park. It's a natural area which should burn. This is more of the same fire suppression nonsense.
It is. It's fire suppression in a different way, isn't it?
It's what we always do. Cows and cattle ranching is an excuse for a commercial industry making money to say we're still useful. Use us to keep fire danger down. LA, we need to graze cows in the Los Angeles forests and take chainsaws and cut all the trees down. Then we have no fire danger. Everything will be perfect. Just get rid of our forests.
We
don't speak these things, people don't understand the truth of it.
The only places left that aren't being grazed by livestock, Jack, are people's front yards and backyards. That's where we draw the line.
Well, no, that's what we have lawnmowers for. No, I'm serious. It's management media. It's man age. You man age everything. Nothing is left to be wild because wild is dangerous and can burn, and wild animals will kill you. So let's kill all the wild animals because they mess with our, livestock businesses for profit. Laura, can you hear us? Oh, Laura, we really need to teleport you to, a city. I think. No. Anyway, when we get the connection, we have more questions for Laura, and hopefully we'll get another 15 minutes of a biologist's, activists' wisdom and thoughts.
A little bit of me is jealous that Laura lives in a place remote enough that she doesn't deal with technology all the time. But these moments make me very sad.
So I'm sorry, what was the optimistic stuff, buddy? What was the optimistic take? That there'll be fewer cows, maybe?
That there might be less barbed wire, but they might designate it as historic barbed wire, Jack.
Very good. It's multi-generational barbed wire.
It's multi-generational barbed wire.
It's been there for 3 generations of white colonialists. That's important stuff, man.
Oh,
those Native Americans weren't civilized enough to put a barbed wire on the land for 10,000 years. And by the way, talk about sharing the management of the Park Service. They also have to deal with Great Rancheria, with Figure, Don't let me. Oh boy, I had a funny joke. I'm going to keep to myself for the moment on Figure, because I won't. And then also now with the Nature Conservancy. So there's this weird co-management deal. So we're allowed to intrude, I say, as citizen activists, to press on the Park Service to do things like we just did successfully. Free the elk, get the cows out. Well, the elk are going to be freed, and we're going to get a lot of the cows out, and we get to monitor now. We get to do videos like you will, I'm sure, my friend, showing if cows go up into the reserve and start damaging the elk reserve, we can make a big stink about that, and they can get them to put it's get the cows out. It's not put fences up. That's the thing. When you put cows in, then you need fences of one kind or another. We're going to put poor shock collars on these gentle, big cows. I mean, it's mankind just does not ever quit.
What if I take some callers?
Well, here we go. I think Laura's back. She went back to her picnic table in the sun, and now she's in shade. Thank you very much for directing the sun, Laura. Let us know when you. She's indicating something. Can you give her sound? Does she have sound, Skylar?
Actually, she does.
Laura, can you try talking
says
again?
host. Oh, okay.
Gotcha.
There we go. There we go. Sorry about that, everyone. I live in a completely remote part of the Western U.S. next to Death Valley National Park. And we've got wind and we've got cell towers going in and out, but I think I'm back.
So, Skylar, would you put Laura front and center so my face is smaller and hers is bigger? Laura, why do you want to take 300 miles of additional barbed wire fencing down? Tell me the significance of that from your perspective, please.
Well, it's not a natural feature in a national park, for one thing, and it actually kills wildlife. I mean, we've got pictures of barbed wire in the antlers of Thule elk. We've got black-tailed deer that get hung up on it. So, I mean, it's a hazard for wildlife. But, back to what I was saying, and sorry about that, everyone, but so take out the barbed wire, take out the houses. You could have maybe a couple of ranches that are historic ranches, right? That can be interpretive. I mean,
don't we already have one? Don't we already have Pierce Point Ranch,
do.
which is actually an old wooden building, historic one? We don't need a modern metal building that was built in the 60s or 70s or 80s or 2000s to be historic. They're not historic. It's all complete nonsense. We have an historic ranch which doesn't have to have any cows or pollution on it. Pierce Point Ranch. Sorry.
Pierce Point Ranch solves that. If you want to go learn about historic dairy ranching, you go to Pierce Point Ranch. And some people do. And they've got plaques and they've got things that actually teach you about historic dairy ranching. All the actual functioning dairy ranches out there don't do that. Don't do that.
And should be removed completely. All the buildings down, all of it gone. Take it back to the wild. How else would you, oh God, woman, how would you restore Point Reyes Seashore once more cows are out, which we'll keep banging on to get all the cows out? What else would you do? How much would you let the land heal itself, let the plants grow as they will? And how much would you go in there and do things aggressively, which I would only entrust to someone like you, not the Park Service, a bureaucracy?
All right. Well, so once we have the cows out and all of the infrastructure, there are still little tiny relict native coastal grasslands with shrubs there. I mean, I've taken Skylar to see some of them. I've taken some field trips in the past, and they're scattered all over the place. So what I would do first is, and I've been doing this, you inventory what's there. And the Park Service will not give us a permit to actually, collect anything or, clip anything. So what I've been doing is taking photographs, walking there, trying to ID all the grasses and plants and wildflowers. There's mosses, lichens, any birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians that I see. But these little tiny native coastal prairie areas need to be inventoried. And I pointed this out to the Park Service over and over again that they have not done that. They've missed them. They've hired University of California at Berkeley to come and do some sort of randomized plots out in the cattle pastures. And maybe they find one native plant and they say, there you go. Okay, yeah, we can use this. And I'm like, you're missing that little corner pasture where the cows don't go, or the roadside where it's outside of the grazing area. Those are the last relicts of what was here for 2,000 years up until the cattle came. So what I've been doing, and I'm going to be doing this more this year, doing field work, inventorying in great detail. And the California Native Plant Society has huge forums that you can go out there and just describe in scientific detail these native grassland, native plant communities. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to write a report up to the Park Service and the Nature Conservancy and say, here's what you have as a start. Now, you could get people to go out there and collect seeds of these native grasses and wildflowers and shrubs, and then, grow them in nurseries. And I'm a great fan of passive restoration. There's two kinds of native plant restoration, passive and active, and they're both good. They both have a purpose. Passive restoration is kind of like you say, Jack, you just let it go. Let nature take its course. Let Mother Nature do this. And largely when we get the cows out and the fences, that can start to happen because, as you guys know, you guys are like really well educated in range management and the impacts of cattle, so that you know that even targeted grazing, the heavy 1,000-pound cow hooves and grazing and manure is going to impact native plants. I mean, that's just
When you say impact, to be clear, you mean damage.
Right.
No, I'm
Yeah.
serious. Impact has an effect on. You mean damage, do harm to the land.
Impact is a big word that describes a lot of different things. There's damage, but there's also a lot of other stuff too that cows do. So it's just more a general term, like they trample, they graze, they add excess nutrients in certain places, they compact soil, they cause erosion, they displace native wildlife and elk. So impact is my term for quite a lot of things. Besides,
wait, you forgot number 7, my favorite: pollute the groundwater, the surface water.
Oh, that's right. Yes, that's a big one. But back to restoration, we can have. I mean, once you get the stressor out of the ecosystem, the cattle, things will start to recover. The invasive European annual grasses. Cheatgrass is actually not in the seashore. That's sort of a dry, high desert. But there are similar brome grasses that are like cheatgrass that are from the Mediterranean region. So they're well adapted to California climate. They thrive on disturbance, heavy disturbance. They're adapted to cows standing in a pasture with a fence around them. They love that. So when you take that out, the land can begin to heal. The California plants that don't like that kind of disturbance can begin to start seeding out from those patches. But we can help them by doing active restoration, where we have that big mud field, right, that Skylar has filmed so well in an ugly way. It's so ugly. But we can start to plant some of the native grasses, wildflowers, like little seeding areas that can help actively restore that area. Plant coyote brush, right? Blackberries, just little islands of that, and then let nature take its course. Different plants have different ways of dispersing. Some will blow in the wind, seed out from those little islands of native coastal prairie. Others are carried by deer. Some forbs, meaning a wildflower, they have burrs and they catch on the fur of deer, and the deer will help spread them. Oaks, scrub jays take those acorns and bury them. So we can work with nature. But I think it would go a lot faster in our lifetimes if we did a little bit of active restoration, where we start to first get a baseline of what we have, that's the original plant communities, grow some of those in nurseries, and then start to plant them or seed them, even collect seed and plant those in little areas out in the destroyed areas that are, flattened. And it'll take a while because the soils have been so compacted, by the cattle trampling, and there are just tons of invasive weed problems. That's like a whole other chapter of a restoration plan, is how you reduce and remove some of the bigger invasive stands like poison hemlock. But I'm with you guys, no herbicides. I'm just not into the herbicides. I think we can do this by hand, hand tools.
Laura, I've had some astonishing progress just going out myself, doing hand pulling and comparing my own study plots to what they're doing with the goat grazing. If California would hire me, you'd actually start making some progress. But, and you mentioned maybe we do need to engage in active restoration. Indeed, because we've been actively destroying for a very long time. These plants could use some help. We owe it to nature to put our hands in there and, do a little something on ourselves instead of just say, hey, maybe someday it'll heal, especially with climate change taking place.
Well, number one, which I think Laura said, and I think agrees with, please correct me if I have that wrong, Laura, is first, stop doing all the damage by cattle. Cattle are the ones that are actively destroying the place, damaging the place, having an impact, as you said. So get them out and stop that. That is the biggest thing we can do, is stop the killing, stop the compacting, desiccation, manure, coating, everything, all of which cattle are still going to do, even if there's only a few hundred or 1,000 instead of 2,000 or 3,000. Jocelyn asked, how can we remove all the non-native invasive weeds that ranchers planted for silage that have spread over acres and acres?
Only with active restoration and the removal of cattle, which means.
Hey, Laura, I didn't ask you, young man.
That was my full answer. I'm done.
Laura, go, please.
Well, each plant from Europe or the Mediterranean has its own ecology too. So you have to, focus on each plant sort of as an individual. So say wild radish or domestic radish is one of the silage plants. Just stop planting it, right? If they stop seeding it, it won't come. And it'll gradually, some of it has escaped, but there are things that you just don't need to plant anymore for the cows, for their silage. Other plants are going to be more difficult to, get down in population, like some of the brome grasses and, there's something called wall barley that's all over. And it's sort of replaced in a stable way our native grassland. So some of that stuff, we may never get rid of. And I'm okay with having some of it as long as we're not encouraging it with mass disturbance and trampling and things like that. So some of the species will probably be here forever, but we can certainly tilt the tide back towards the native grasses, which are going to be, much more beautiful, much more biodiverse, and sequester carbon, hold soils together so we don't get all this erosion and water pollution. And elk love to eat them. So, one thing about the coast, the old growth, I call it old growth coastal prairies, is you get down on your hands and knees, and some of these things, man, they are like a cloud forest in the tropics. Because there's so much fog in the summer and rain in the winter on the coast, you have these lichens that, like, some of them are branched and are like inches tall under the bunchgrass canopy. There's carpets of mosses. So there's
That's what the herbicide is for.
Yeah, I know.
Skylar, you
there's
behave.
This whole micro, like, biodiversity that has been completely eliminated. When you get a cow hoof on that stuff, it's gone. So not to mention decades of heavy dairy herds and manure dumping and silage growing. But that stuff may take 100 years to get back. But hey, I'm here for it. Our kids are here for it. Our grandkids. We're going to do this.
And how do we've had this topic before, but I wanted to ask you, how is it that elk, lots more elk, there's roughly 700 elk now, probably more. We're still waiting for the elk count this year, by the way, which may or may not come because the Park Service has been busy. But how do Thule elk, have a different impact on all these delicate plants you're talking about that cows damage?
Well, the elk are much lighter. They're like, half or even less the weight of a cow, especially a dairy cow. The Thule elk are a pretty small subspecies of elk. So they have much smaller hooves. They weigh less. They don't compress the soil as much. And they tend to wander. They're wildlife. They're wild animals. They take a bite and then move on. They've got long legs. They are designed to wander in big herds. In fact, before European settlement, Thule elk may have migrated out of the seashore area for the inland valleys. We have no idea, but I theorize they might have done some sort of migration in and out of the seashore. So the prairies got a rest, and there were no fences again. So the herds wandered over tens, hundreds of miles. So, there's just really no difference between a intensive for-profit commercial cattle operation where you need to keep all these cows fenced in this one area, and you have to water them and give them excess, alfalfa hay during the dry season because they're not allowed to migrate. It's just completely different worlds.
And that also goes for so-called regenerative ranching or holistic management or rotational grazing, all bullshit terms, in my humble opinion, of which I know I'm right because I've read a ton on this. When you move the cows around a lot, it's still an extractive industry. You still take the cows off the land to kill them for their meat and for their milk. So it's still not like a wild animal which dies on the land, decays in the land, goes back into the land, a closed loop. versus what Ken Brower, I always credit Ken with teaching me the phrase extractive industry. Domesticated cows, and as you were saying also, the elk eat less and move more. Cows move less and eat a lot more. And then you take that fattened animal, the poor genetically overbred animal, to become wildly overfat, and take it off the land. Completely different use of the land. I just want to keep underlining that in every show I get to run my mouth on.
And it's not just what they eat. Wildlife actually pay attention to what they step on. Like, they actually make an effort not to destroy as they move through. Whereas when I go through a grazed area, it's just been utterly destroyed. And I have a real world example. One of these restoration areas that I've been documenting has actually a lot of wavy leaf soap plant growing. So I'm really excited to see a healthy population of it. And I just now finally saw that one had been fed upon. One. All the rest of them pristine. You know, you can't even tell an animal moved through there. Nothing's been damaged except for one that was nibbled on.
So, Laura, we're coming up at the 10 o'clock hour. I'm not taking Skyward's place of running a show here, and we can run long. That's fine. But just please, is there something else that you would like to speak about? You know, here's an opportunity to make sure you get to say whatever it is you like to say.
I'd just like to say, I really appreciate all the people that we've been working with over the years, our grassroots groups and our other conservation groups. I mean, you guys are all awesome, and we couldn't have done this without you. I mean, all the people just going out there and looking at our beautiful parklands and hiking and, learning about how cattle destroy, there you go, Jack, destroy grasslands, native grasslands. So, I really appreciate everyone here for, and keeping with it, the patience to keep up with this years and years and years long process for our precious seashore.
Thank you, Laura. And again, it's the reason for me to have that. I keep mentioning the March 1st celebratory party of this big bit of progress for Point Reyes Seashore, getting cows out and freeing the elk, or getting most of the cows out. Not all of them, unfortunately. We want them all out, but we get to continue this work to keep people. And of course, what you're talking about is people who love the land and love nature and love the wild animals and go to this place for healing and restoration and a sense of peace in our lives. And God knows we need that more and more now with the insanity of, politics and humanity's, well, I would call it on a happy note, a broad swath of destruction across all of the earth. So you go to Point Reyes and you can get a little bit of escape from it when you're not, as Skyward, thank God, does, gets worked up looking at the harm that mankind, as I like to say, man is not so kind, does to the land. So this consortium of people you speak of needs to continue and hopefully be inspired by this win and say, now we get to, champion Laura Cunningham, the Laura Cunninghams, and say, what would you do here? And let's have your voice amplified by us talkers and the media and our citizen activist consortium so that the Park Service hears it and will pay attention as they just did. Without this whole group here, there would have been 20-year leases for everything and nothing would have changed.
It would have gotten worse if, in fact, the proposed plan had gone through. So there, I'm being positive. At least we stopped that. And we have our peak number of live viewers right now. So if you guys are game, I'd like to keep going for a few minutes. And I really encourage people to type in some comments, some questions for Laura, because it's a special treat to have her here to be able to answer them.
Laura Cunningham, conservation biologist, California director of the Western Watersheds Project, folks. What's your website for donations, Laura?
westernwatersheds.org.
westernwatersheds.org. If you like what Laura does, and you should, if you've been paying attention, you can support her organization directly. And of course, Skyward with watchinghumans.org. Subscribe to your Skyward YouTube channel. And I'm Jack Gescheit of the Tree Spirit Project.
I put in the chat the playlist of me and Laura. Laura, you really gave me a lot of your time in the past. Those are some pretty major projects. So I appreciate that. And I want to share, I have the unique perspective of knowing nothing when I started this and actually knowing a fair amount now. But Laura, you suffered through those beginning stages where I would text you and say, hey, what is this? What is this?
No, I really like it when you asked what you sent me text me a picture of a leaf, some plant out there on the seashore. I loved it. No, that's great. This is what we need to do. Everyone in the Bay Area, I want to get them out there and say, this is your amazing, only national seashore on the Pacific coast with native elk. Maybe we're going to get wolves someday, the way they're going, cougars, bobcats, bunch grasses. We could have more of that. So no, that was great, Skylar. Anytime.
Hey, here's an idea. When you come out next, since sounds like you will come out and do some studies out there, might you be willing to, I got a couple ideas. One is to lead another, we'll promote it so that people hear about it, and come join Laura Cunningham for a tour, for a talk, for a walk, whatever it is you want to. I mean, I know you've done that kind of thing before. And I would say, suggest a donation of $20 to help, pay for your travel or your trip or your lodging or however it would be. But we can definitely work on something like that if you like.
Yeah, we should do that this spring. Let's do it.
A question that was asked while you were away, Laura, was about the involvement of the public in restoration. And I asked you this in an email. Do you think that the Park Service, this is going to open up doors to have more outside organizations or even volunteers try and restore the seashore? Or do you think that they're going to, I'm concerned that they're a little bit worried about how bad it's going to make them look when progress finally starts being made.
Well, remember, this is our public lands. Our tax dollars go to pay the salaries of the Park Service employees. So, I mean, of course, this is unceded land of the Coast Miwok. So we have to respect that, this was and should be tribally also managed land, right? I want to always point that out. But this is public land. We need to volunteer to get in there. We need to shove those parks people aside who tell us to go away and force our way into volunteering to help restore the seashore. I mean, every park has volunteer programs. I've volunteered at Death Valley National Park where I live. I'm surprised that the seashore has not had more volunteer programs. So I think it's going to be crucial to have volunteers come and help try to plant plants, collect seed, do volunteer programs where we go out and document what's out there. So,
and here I'll be positive again. Less ranchers out there means less resistance, because the ranchers actually weren't very friendly to the public.
Right. That's a big problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. Skylar, I'm getting worried about you.
Hey, I want to share Laura not only is everything else she does, she's also a cartoonist, and she made this. And
wow, that's great. Just let that sit for a second here.
I included that in Elk Water, which, was only shown once, but it really does
sum it up.
Yeah, it really does.
And that has changed a lot. The far character on the far right with Ag on the hat, the rancher, has shrunken considerably in size, at least in the park, if not, in America or California.
Well, they aren't gone.
Yeah.
That's a scary thing.
Yep.
I mean, Laura, do you have any worries that they're going to do the same thing? Just not leave again?
Yes.
Well, I don't, kids. I don't, because they haven't been paid yet. That's the difference. I was talking about this. It's a time release capsule now. They get paid as they leave. They're not going to get their money. And then, 10 years, 20 years later, we promised to leave after our 25-year life lease expires. That's not the deal. In fact, we're down to 14 months now, not even 15 months. The time is going to go by, as you fellow over 50 people know, a year goes by pretty quickly. So we're going to be here to see it. And I think some of them are already sort of reducing the number of cows. Largely, there's far fewer dairy cows in the park already. And I think, as we keep our full court public relations press on, countering the lies of, no, I don't want to name names, Albert Strauss and Kevin Lunny, but those people are, putting out rancher-friendly propaganda, how terrible it is and how much they contribute to the economy when they contribute nothing to the economy comparatively to tourism, which contributes a great deal to the economy, and how this is a good deal for the ranchers who are getting, as I call it, a golden parachute to get out of the park. They're being paid to leave when they didn't own the land and they don't own the leases. We're not technically, correct me, Skylar, the ranch leases are not being bought out. They're giving them money so they don't continue lobbying to get lease renewals, which are not guaranteed. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
So they go buy. I mean, all the reporters are doing this now in the popular local crappy, too often crappy media about they're buying out the leases. No, we're not buying them. They don't own anything. They have lease deals, and they've been lobbying for 20-year leases, which they of course don't deserve because they're in violation of, water regulations, if nothing else, polluting the water locally, state, and federally.
Speaking of violations, Laura, what's the latest on the FOIA requests?
They still have not, the Park Service has not fulfilled my Thule elk portion of my FOIA.
We're talking about years late, right?
Yes.
Isn't that illegal?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so I won't make you say this. To me, this makes me feel like they're protecting the ranchers and themselves, I guess. But like, you are not allowed to delay in coming through with the FOIA requests even close to as long as the Park Service has. And here's a follow-up question, because you've worked with public lands in other areas. Have you ever experienced anything like this with FOIA requests before?
I actually have with like the Bureau of Land Management, but I have to say that it does help the federal agencies, especially the Park Service, when we kind of push back in a polite way and have their back, right? They're getting pushed by the agricultural lobby a lot. And so when the public comes and says, hey, I really like Thule elk, I want to hike, that helps them. That actually, I'm married to a career National Park Service ranger. He's not in the Park Service now. He retired, but he always said, it's really good when we get letters from the public saying, hey, good job. We want you to do this good thing. It helps them. So I think that's where we've all, like, over the years, we've pushed in various, hard and soft ways, but I think that it's definitely helped push back against the ranchers who are pushing a lot constantly.
Straight question, Laura, and you don't need to answer this, just to make it really clear, but are you toying with trying to make the trip out to the March 1st gathering, or that's not going to work for your travel plans?
I don't think that's going to work for the travel plan. So yeah, maybe I can get somebody to have a phone and I can say hi at least to everybody.
We can try to do a FaceTime for a couple people. I'm not sure how well that works. Depends on the internet connection there, but it's just one more thing logistically to tackle. And it wouldn't be a matter of lodging for you, correct? That's not the issue. It's travel time and all that.
Right.
Okay. I wanted to ask while I had you here.
One of our longtime viewers from Indiana says he's going to head this way in the summer. Well, keep us posted. We'll try and maybe we can line it with another event.
Wow.
And when you were talking about documenting the plants out there and taking clippings, are the clippings like for propagation?
Right. Yeah. Under permit, and I'm sure that there are plenty of organizations that could help do this. My sister works for the city of Albany in the East Bay, and she runs a nursery where they go and do this. Albany Hill is a city park, has beautiful coastal prairie. And she regularly goes out and collects seed from foothill needlegrass, blue wild rye, all of these grasses, plants them in little pots, grows them out, and then replants them back in the prairie. That's my form of active restoration, where we could start to do that out in those, barren cattle grazed pastures once we get the cows out. And this will be a part of my restoration plan, is how do we thread the needle of doing that while we have targeted grazing operations out there in, whatever outer perimeter from the ranch cores. That's something that, I'm skeptical of myself, that we're going to have both, but we're going to see. And this is what we can all do, is monitor this too through the years and critique it. We can critique the TNC, the Nature Conservancy's methods. We can tell the Park Service this is not going to work to have coastal prairie and targeted grazing. We'll see. We'll see. I want to document the evidence scientifically and present it back to the Park Service.
And I will totally help amplify that message. I mean, I think it's absolutely legitimate that we can publicize that cows do no good. They are not necessary to keep fire danger down. That's utter nonsense. We shouldn't be keeping fire danger down in a national seashore, a national park unit. You don't manage everything. You protect buildings from fire. That's all. And the rest of it, if it would to burn, that is a good thing. Fire is a natural part of the ecology in the landscape. And we just need to push it out there so that, like we did with this progress here, educate the public, put it through the media, fight on the media who's going to push back on the dominant belief systems and say we don't need cattle to in any way heal the land or help the park. It's complete, Jack with his histrionics, complete nonsense, all of it.
Nature's resilience is absolutely mind-blowing. There are areas where I see a native plant try to come back. I'm like, how after all of this abuse are you still trying to come back? But the positive of that is that if we would just get the cattle out of there, they would start to come back. Mm-hmm. But if you're doing targeted grazing, that means as soon as we start to get progress, they're going to come and feed that progress to the cows.
And I agree with that, Skylar, for sure. Now, my optimistic, perhaps naive hope is that because it's less grazing and not by ranchers who own the land, who have the land there and say, I want my cows all over this area, that there will be fewer areas impacted, destroyed by cattle grazing. There'll just be fewer cows overall, and they're going to be in more controlled areas. And as Laura was saying earlier, moved around a bit more. So although they do damage, they won't do as much damage. That's my hope. And what Laura said, we citizen activists need to keep monitoring.
Laura, I asked Eric this question, and I said, is it considering the things that we say? And he says, you as a biologist, ecologist, in the understanding of the damage that livestock do, and that California's history is marked by European livestock coming here and destroying the native habitat that was working. How can there actually be biologists or ecologists working at Point Reyes National Seashore that believe that cattle are a good thing? Do they actually believe that? Or is it politics?
That's a good question. And, if you can get them on your show and ask them, I'd be curious too.
If you could arrange that, you would be amazing. I would love to see that happen.
Well, but I'm not sure. I think it's some people may really believe it, or, maybe it's their politics. I don't know. I mean, I have the same problem out here, where I work a lot in the Great Basin. There's propaganda that's become so seeped into our heads and our culture that you really have to actively get it out of your head. And one of them is, coyote brush is evil and invasive. Another one is, the native pinyon pine trees that provide pine nuts and are beautiful shade. They're invasive, and they're actively chainsawing them down right now as I speak in Eastern California and Nevada, because they're encroaching. They're these words, and we hear them year after year. They're somehow out of balance, and they're encroaching, and so we have to remove them. But when you go back in time with these pieces of propaganda, you suddenly hit on the original words, and it's range management are the words. And then suddenly you shift it. Oh, no, it's fire fuel reduction. It's sage grouse restoration habitat. It's, invasive coyote brush removal so we can have open grasslands. And it's all propaganda. And it's all.
I was just thinking, I mean, we've got a UC Davis near me, which has rangeland science. I mean, you go to college and get further brainwashed.
Yep.
And I just got to throw in my voice here on this. Karen writes, I'm so sick of cow culture. And cow culture exists, including all the disinformation and propaganda, including through the academics that you're talking about, well, both of you. And it's all because people watching this show, and the majority of people who aren't watching the show, eat beef and eat dairy products. If we people stop eating those products, then the cattle industry would begin to reduce in size, which, oh, by the way, for the record, for this show about the damage that cattle do, we haven't said that beef and dairy products from domesticated cows exploited for profit is a main driver of the climate crisis. I'm going to be giving a talk soon with Jim Coda and with Eric at the Marin Coalition. That's 5 days after the March 1st party. And I'm so excited to get to try to say this stuff slowly with resonance and impact to a room full of people who are all part of cow culture. And they call themselves marine environmentalists. Fascinating, Captain. The cognitive dissonance, fascinating.
So Karen asks if I've asked them to come on the show. No, it's hard to get a response. I have to use an alias. I've been at war with these people for a long time, but you know, this brings up an interesting point because there's a lot of staff there. Of all the people there, Laura, who do you think would be the most intriguing to get on the show?
Well, certainly Dave Press, the biologist,
God,
would be interesting to talk to. I used to talk to him on the phone, you know, and then the new superintendent might be interesting to get. You know, I wish we could have gotten Craig Kinkle, the, you know, past superintendent. He was very nice to me on the phone. We would have conversations. So that was before the litigation, however. But now afterwards, they should be starting to talk again, I would think, if we're respectful and ask good questions like you guys do. I mean, they work for us. They should actually be open to conversations now.
Let me say something that'll spur a response from Skylar here. And I'm not just being playful. It's true. I have trouble with those very reasonable ideas, Laura. Just engage in conversation with these folks. But I'm aware the conversation we can have publicly that's recorded and put out to the world would necessarily be very different from a sidebar conversation in private that isn't recorded, because they can't speak the full truth, because it's cow culture and management culture, which I am constantly, as an extreme environmentalist who doesn't want to kill any of nature, that's how extreme I am, and not concerned about making profit first, which is our system, I'm going to be challenging them on everything they say. I was thinking of having Kevin Lunny on. He's probably the one guy you could get on, but it would be basically stopping him every other sentence and say, that's a lie. And we'd get into it. And like, what would be accomplished? And even if he could concede something privately, like, well, yeah, but I can't say that. It's the politician's realm of what you can say publicly versus what you say privately. And all of us play politics to a small degree. I can't do it on a public forum where I just have to speak the truth. That's my self-described, self-appointed role.
that was one of the first feelings I had when I was trying to make the Shaman Point Reyes and actually get some of these people to talk. And when I would speak to the Park Service, I was like, am I talking to a rancher? Like, I expect this type of crap to come out of a rancher's mouth, but you guys sound like you are the ranchers. You don't sound like a Park Service staff. Hey, Sledge, I see you. I'll bring you in just a second. Hang in there.
And by the way, this goes back to Diane Oppenheim, who, like us, was an activist who wanted to speak the truth. Hey, I love the elk and I don't want, cows damaging the land and killing elk behind fences. She wanted to talk about that with people, and she was muzzled. They said, no, you can't say this, so you can't stick around here and do this job. So there you have it right there. The dominant culture, our culture in this society, is pro-cattle ranching, which is, one of the most destructive industries on the planet, up there with the fossil fuel industry, which is, intersects, of course, with raising cows for human consumption.
Hey,
And,
Jocelyn,
go ahead.
Jocelyn, I'm still looking for the alfalfa section in the grocery store, because I see the alfalfa trucks up and down the highways and the hay trucks and the fields growing them. And, it's to feed humans, right? No.
You sarcastic man. Your point is that alfalfa takes a lot of water, but most of that is grown to feed cattle, not for humans. And of course, anything vegetable is far more efficient to eat for humans than any cow product, dairy and beef.
Guys, Sledge has been very patient. Let's let Sledge come on. Sledge, hey.
America, heck yeah.
Do you have a question for Laura?
You know it. Well, no, I kind of, yes, and I agree with what she had to say about regenerating, you know. And if you've got all that fence out there, what about taking that fence that they can't get through and blocking it into like 5-acre plots, you know, some on the high ground, some on the lower land, some on a hillside, to get that regenerated growing. So then nature, by the seeds and the birds, will start to disperse it outside that fence. After 5 or so years, you can remove that fence. The animals can come in, the bigger animals. You could move that 5-acre of fence somewhere else, not like in a checkerboard pattern, but in a way, like I said, you'd have some on the hills where those certain native bushes or plants like it a little drier, somewhere in a little lower, and start to build those blocks to speed up the regeneration by nature, by the birds and everything else that can get in that fence.
You're probably like that. That might be an idea, like for the reality we have now, where there are going to be cows. I think there are going to be cows in a core area. There'll be targeted grazing out in the scenic landscape zone. So, I mean, that might be an idea to keep cows out of certain, acre sections so that we can start to build these blocks of coastal prairie restored. Don't use the
Yes,
word
where
regenerative.
we've got the cows out so far, where we can hold them back, take some of that other fencing, and that way, bring in those native plants. Yeah, I think it was, you said your sister has a nursery that does that, and that way we can build a 5-acre block. That way some of the scrub oaks and stuff like that can get up, get going. Birds can come in there, move that seed, and then slowly just move them. And then who knows, after, I don't know how long you'd have to leave the fence up. I don't know anything about these grasses and trees or any of that, but after so many years, you should be able to lift that fenced off area, move it to another area. The wind and all that would spread those seeds and it would speed it up, I believe.
You know what
that's
I'd
an
like to
idea.
see? You know what
I mean-
I'd like. Oops, sorry, Laura, go.
Oh, I was just going to say that's a good idea. I mean, if we can get the Park Service to agree to that. I mean, part of the big problem about all of this is, we had so many good comments during the environmental review period, and suddenly everything is sort of shifted and we're in this whole new world. And I agree, part of it was sort of outside of the public review. So we've sort of been dropped this final decision, the record of decision, and I'm still reading it thinking, oh, okay, this is the new reality here. So I would encourage you and everyone in the public to write your ideas to the Park Service. I don't know how much now we can get them to do, but we should be able to maybe push back against targeted grazing everywhere, virtual fencing everywhere. So, I mean, write up your idea and send it to us and the Park Service.
I'm a big proponent of the strategy of say one thing and say it well and repeat it, say it often. And for me, the number one thing I would do among all these subtle little suggestions we could make: no targeted grazing, no cows in the park. No targeted grazing, no cows in the park. And I could, for half an hour, just say those two ideas to get them across. I think that's the most important thing, which is like the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm with cows.
At a minimum, in those areas where they're going to do the targeted grazing, let's set up some study plots where the cows aren't allowed in so that we have a visual of how badly the cattle are failing.
There you go. Guys, or Skyward, we're coming up on an hour and a half.
Thank you, Sledge, for calling in. And I guess we can wrap it up.
My concern is if we have a 2-hour show, fewer people will tune into it than if it's a 90-minute show. I don't know.
we'll do a follow-up, and maybe we can get into some of the intricacies of the plants and the roots and the relationships. And ladies and gentlemen, I've put it in the chat. I'll put it in the description. Like that cloud forest that Laura described, we found one. We found these little pockets. Laura and I went out, and we have this on video. You can see how amazing and how biodiverse Point Reyes is capable of being on video right now. We've already done it because there weren't any cattle there, because they forgot to destroy that area.
Oh, before I forget, Skyward, that whatever 3, 4, 5 minute video you showed, which really does contrast with really appropriate, necessary, important commentation. You're being a commentator saying this is where the cattle are, look at what they do. This is where the elk are, look at how they are not impactful on the land, damaging to the land. That would be a great video. I'd love to have that on a USB drive, and we'll run it at the party. We're going to show a few videos, just kind of constantly, off to the side where people can gather around and watch. I think that'd be a nice one to show if you're willing. We'll talk about that. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And Jocelyn, I had the same thought. Humans immediately like, oh, look what we can do. Look what we can invent. Look at our technology. Maybe you could stop fucking electrocuting everything. Maybe you could stop creating borders. How many of these people even considered how that's going to impact the wildlife? And guess what? I'm compassionate enough that I don't really like the idea of doing it to the cows either.
Thank you. I was just going to go on a little sidebar tirade about that. As we take these beautiful, gentle animals, breed the heck out of them, make them way too big and carry too much milk, slaughter them when they're children, when they're adolescents for their flesh, or repeatedly, forcibly violate them, blah, 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 blah. And then we're going to put shock collars on them. I mean, talk about the manipulation and debasement, the cruel damage we do to animals of all kinds. It's just dogs and cats and horses have it pretty good. Dogs and cats, really. Horses get abused for racing. But to treat cows this way, and you see them on sanctuaries where they're running around like happy puppy because no one's abusing them, where they seem these docile animals because they're beaten down. The treatment of animals worldwide is just an epidemic of insanity. We humans treat animals. And I'm not just an animal rights activist, and I'm speaking this stuff. I've just become aware, working as a consultant for In Defense of Animals, how widespread our brutal treatment of all animals on the planet is. We kill the wild ones and then brutalize the domesticated ones, which we've turned into domesticated for-profit animals. Have a nice day, folks. Thanks for being here.
No, thanks, Chuck and Scholar. Hey, I'm a vegan too, especially in the last 10 years of looking at all this stuff. And I have to say, I'm really got an education about organic dairies from working with you guys on the seashore. Wow, okay, I'm not going to go there now. But my one last thing to say is, the Bay Area, I grew up in the East Bay. I've been going to the seashore since the 80s now. And it's like our one park where we could have this mini Yellowstone of the Pacific with wildlife, just for wildlife, native plants and animals and birds and whales and sea lions and all that. All the other parks in the Bay Area have cows, right? East Bay Regional Park District, Mid-Peninsula Open Space. So many of our parks in the Bay Area have to have cattle, right? For whatever reason.
Money.
And so the seashore is so special. We could have this one area where it could be for elk and deer and bunch grasses and lichens. So, but yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks for the show. This is really good to talk.
Thank you, Laura, for all your work and coming on. Fantastic.
And viewers, some of you at the beginning said, hey, you're not getting notifications. YouTube can be tricky. I think you have to not only like and subscribe, but also click a bell icon that'll says that you're going to get notified. I'm still figuring it out myself, but
and also along with that, if everyone here listening would just go, Skyward's going to post this video in the next 30 minutes or so. It'll be on the YouTube channel. If you just make comments, just like, hey, that was a great show. The shortest little thing, doesn't take a lot of time. Those comments add to the algorithm and drives the show out to more people. It's really important to be engaged with the show even after the show, if you're willing, folks. Just a couple minutes, not even a couple minutes, 30-second investment really does help get more of this out to more people.
We had a few new people today. Welcome. Jocelyn Knight was new. And
Derek's here. Look at Derek.
There's Derek.
Yay, Derek.
Yeah, Derek, talk about boots on the ground. Yeah, and if you leave comments in these, it'll help us prepare with questions for the next show too. And we'll prepare one for a follow up with Laura. Laura, great to have you back to the land of the speaking.
Laura unmuzzled. Thanks, Paula. Thanks, Karen, as always, for coming on. Appreciate your comments. I do read them here. By the way, we got to figure out a way where I can type in some comments too, so it's not just all on you, Skylar. If there's a way to do that. But another issue. Moving on.
Okay, I think you can. Well, stay on after we turn this off.
Okay.
Because I think you can. Thank you, Laura, and look forward to talking to you.